The year was 1796, a time when Europe was still reeling from the ripple effects of the Enlightenment, a period marked by a turbulent fusion of reason and superstition. In Lisbon, the cobbled streets buzzed with the chatter of intellectuals, merchants, and the working class, all unaware that something far darker was about to unfold, something that would be intertwined with the very fabric of the city's fate. At the heart of it all, a single autopsy report remained hidden in plain sight, its grim contents buried beneath layers of medical jargon and outdated beliefs. Yet, within the cold, clinical details of this report lay an eerie prophecy, one that would ultimately predict a disaster that shook the city to its core. But how could such a thing be possible? How could an autopsy, a simple medical examination of a body, contain within it the foretelling of a citywide tragedy that would unfold years later? And what, if anything, could this mysterious document reveal about the strange ways in which history weaves its dark threads through the lives of the living? The answer lies in the quiet, unsettling nature of the human condition, and in how something as seemingly innocuous as an autopsy could, in the right hands, reveal far more than anyone might anticipate. Dr. Francisco de Almeida, a respected physician in Lisbon, had no idea that his findings during an autopsy in 1796 would go on to haunt the city for years to come. At the time, he was just performing his usual duties, investigating the body of a patient who had died under mysterious circumstances. The details of the patient's death were unremarkable, at least to the layman. A man had passed away, his life snuffed out prematurely, and it fell to Dr. Almeida to uncover the cause. Yet as he examined the body, Dr. Almeida noticed something unusual, something that would, in hindsight, send a shiver down the spine of anyone who dared to revisit his report years later. His medical training, honed over years of rigorous study, had taught him to be meticulous, to pay attention to the smallest of details, to observe patterns in the body that might hint at something more sinister than mere disease. And it was this very training that led him to write down his observations that, at the time, appeared innocuous, even irrelevant. But what he had recorded was no ordinary medical diagnosis. There was something about the organs, something about the patient's internal structures, that didn't quite fit the medical norms of the time. His notes, filled with technical language, described symptoms that seemed disconnected, fragments of a larger picture that no one could yet comprehend. Dr. Almeida's findings were, for all intents and purposes, buried. The city of Lisbon had bigger concerns. The 18th century had been a time of great upheaval, and Lisbon, while a hub of intellectual and artistic progress, was no stranger to the anxieties of the age. The old world and the new were constantly at odds, with religious dogma and superstitions competing against the rise of scientific reasoning. This was a time when advancements in medicine and anatomy were breaking new ground, but where people still believed in omens, in signs from the gods, in the inexplicable forces of nature that could bring about catastrophe. Dr. Almeida's findings might have gone unnoticed, buried beneath the weight of the city's busy social and political life. After all, autopsies were still a relatively new practice, and few could have predicted that what he had observed in the body of one man might serve as a grim marker for an event that would send shockwaves throughout Lisbon. For a time, the autopsy report gathered dust, its implications largely forgotten. But as history often reveals, time has a way of resurrecting the past, and what had been dismissed as an irrelevant detail would later be examined through a different lens. As the years passed, the spectre of disaster began to take shape. Lisbon was no stranger to tragedy. It had endured countless trials throughout its history, plagues, political unrest, and economic instability, but nothing could prepare it for the catastrophe that would unfold in 1755. The Great Lisbon Earthquake, as it would come to be known, was one of the deadliest earthquakes in history, a cataclysmic event that leveled the city in a matter of minutes. Thousands of people perished, either crushed by the collapsing buildings or drowned by the massive tsunami that followed. The horror of that day would forever alter the course of Lisbon's history, leaving behind not only physical ruins but also psychological scars that would take generations to heal. For those who survived, the earthquake left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of the city. It raised questions that lingered in the air for years. Was this the result of divine punishment? Could anyone have foreseen such a devastating disaster? And if so, why hadn't they acted? It was against this backdrop of fear and uncertainty that Dr. Almeida's autopsy report was rediscovered. As historians and medical experts combed through old records, they stumbled upon the forgotten document, buried in the archives of Lisbon's medical history. What they found sent a chill through their spines. The report, written by Dr. Almeida in 1796, contained not only detailed medical observations but also a disquieting prediction. His notes seemed to describe the physical symptoms of those who would later perish in the earthquake, symptoms that, at the time, seemed disconnected and irrelevant. But in hindsight, they appeared as though they were describing something more, something that lay beneath the surface of the city, waiting to erupt. What was even more unsettling was the way in which Dr. Almeida's observations mirrored the very disaster that would strike Lisbon years after his report was written. It was as if, in some inexplicable way, the doctor had tapped into a hidden rhythm of nature, one that linked human biology to the larger forces of the earth. How could a simple autopsy have predicted such a colossal event? Was this merely a coincidence, or was it possible that certain individuals, through a combination of intuition, knowledge, and an uncanny sensitivity to the world around them, could foresee the unseen forces of nature? As the documentary delves deeper into this mystery, the viewer is drawn into a world where the boundaries between science and superstition blur, where the strange intersections between the human body and the natural world defy explanation. The tension between the rational and the irrational is palpable, and the question remains, how could Dr. Almeida, a man steeped in the medical knowledge of his time, have left behind a record that seems to predict a tragedy that was beyond anyone's imagination? What did he know that no one else did? The mystery of Dr. Almeida's autopsy report is more than just a strange historical anomaly. It is a reminder that history is often filled with unseen forces, forces that shape the world in ways we can't always understand. There are moments in time where the past and future seem to collide, where a single document can hold the key to unlocking a hidden truth, a truth that might remain locked away for centuries before someone, somewhere, finally uncovers it. The tragedy of Lisbon is just one example of how the past can leave behind clues that may one day be deciphered, revealing the strange and unsettling connections between human lives and the disasters that befall us. In this dark narrative, the eerie prophecy of Dr. Almeida's autopsy becomes more than just a medical mystery. It becomes a haunting reminder that some mysteries lie just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered, sometimes in the most unexpected of places. The story of the autopsy report that predicted a citywide tragedy is a testament to the strange ways in which the past and present are intertwined, and how, even in the most seemingly ordinary of events, there may be glimpses of a future that we are only just beginning to understand. Lisbon, 1796. The city, vibrant with life and at the crossroads of Europe's great cultural and political currents, held a tension in the air that went beyond the ordinary concerns of its people. There was an undercurrent of unease, a quiet anxiety shared by the residents who lived within its walls, though they couldn't yet see the shadows gathering on the horizon. This was an era when the old world was beginning to collide with the new, when the forces of progress were at war with the remnants of ancient beliefs, and when the dawning scientific age seemed to hold as much promise as it did danger. The streets of Lisbon, with their narrow alleys and grand squares, pulsed with energy, an energy that would soon be tested by an event that no one could have predicted. At the dawn of the 19th century, Lisbon was one of the most significant cities in Europe, a hub of intellectual activity and scientific experimentation. Its universities were a breeding ground for new ideas, while its role as a seaport meant that it was constantly exposed to new influences from the far reaches of the globe. The Age of Enlightenment was in full swing, and Lisbon, like many other European capitals, was swept up in the intellectual fervor that sought to overthrow centuries of superstition and mysticism in favor of reason and empirical evidence. The great minds of the time, men like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot, had long ago set the stage for an intellectual revolution. Science, philosophy, and medicine were advancing at a rate previously unseen in human history. Yet, even in Lisbon, with its newfound obsession with Enlightenment thinking, the shadows of the past were never far behind. Beneath the intellectual fervor that seemed to saturate the air, many in Lisbon still clung to the old ways of thinking, superstitions, fears, and religious beliefs that had shaped the city's culture for centuries. The Catholic Church, deeply entrenched in the fabric of daily life, continued to wield considerable influence over the minds and hearts of the population. Traditional healing methods, rooted in ancient rituals and herbal remedies, coexisted alongside the emerging medical sciences. People feared the unknown, and the city was rife with stories of portents, omens, and signs from the heavens, warning of disaster and doom. Lisbon, for all its advances in thought and philosophy, was still a city gripped by the same fears that had plagued mankind for centuries, the fear of death, of the unknown, and of forces beyond human comprehension. In this turbulent cultural atmosphere, Dr. Francisco de Almeida was a figure who straddled both worlds, the world of reason and the world of belief. A respected physician with a keen mind for medical science, Dr. Almeida was a man caught between the emerging medical paradigm of the Enlightenment and the older, more mystical views of the world that still lingered in the streets of Lisbon. Medicine was in the midst of a revolution, as new methods of diagnosis, dissection, and surgery were being developed, but it was still far from the precise, scientific practice we know today. The human body was still shrouded in mystery, and the medical world was in the midst of deciphering its most basic functions. While some physicians like Dr. Almeida had embraced the new sciences, there were many others who clung to the ancient teachings of Galen and Hippocrates, their understanding of the human body limited by outdated theories. In Lisbon, the struggle between these two worlds played out on a daily basis. On one hand, there were the bustling salons where philosophers debated the nature of human existence, and on the other, there were the quiet, dimly lit corners of the city where the people still feared the wrath of God or the powers of dark magic. It was in this environment that Dr. Almeida found himself working, navigating the fine line between tradition and progress. His work as a physician was not only about understanding the physical body but also about interpreting the signs that the body itself might reveal, a task that, while rooted in science, often took on a mystical tone. The setting of Lisbon in 1796 is crucial to understanding the significance of the autopsy report that would come to be remembered for centuries. Lisbon was a city of contrast. On one side, there was the burgeoning world of scientific exploration, and on the other, the deeply entrenched world of faith and superstition. Almeida were learning more about the body's inner workings every day. Yet, the medicine of the time was still crude compared to today's standards. There were no antibiotics, no modern surgical tools, and no reliable methods for diagnosing many of the diseases that plagued the population. Medicine was still more of an art than a science, and the line between doctor and healer was often blurred. The practices of bloodletting, purging, and herbal remedies were still common, despite the rise of more rational approaches to healthcare. In a city like Lisbon, where the clash of ideas was ever present, medical professionals had to navigate not only the limitations of their knowledge but also the deep-set fears and superstitions of the people they treated. It is within this context that we must view the autopsy report written by Dr. Almeida. His findings, while medically significant, were also deeply influenced by the environment in which he worked. The report that he wrote was not simply a collection of clinical observations. It was a reflection of the times in which it was written. The report spoke not only to the physical state of the body but also to the cultural and intellectual climate of Lisbon at the time. In a city still reeling from the trauma of the earthquake, where many were convinced that the end of the world was near, the implications of the autopsy report would have been far more significant than they appeared at first glance. Dr. Almeida's report, though not widely recognized in his time, would come to symbolize the uneasy tension between progress and superstition that defined Lisbon in the late 18th century. It was an era when the promise of reason and science coexisted uneasily with the lingering shadows of fear and mysticism. The autopsy report that he penned in 1796, documenting strange findings that appeared disconnected from any known medical condition, would eventually come to be seen as something more, a cryptic message about the future, about the fate of Lisbon itself. As the city continued to evolve and change, so too did its people's understanding of the world around them. The Enlightenment ideas that had taken root in the intellectual salons of Lisbon would continue to challenge old beliefs, but the shadows of the past would not be easily dispelled. The events that would unfold in Lisbon over the next few years, the Great Earthquake of 1755, the ongoing political turmoil, and the rise of new scientific ideas, would only serve to deepen the city's sense of fear and uncertainty. The autopsy report, long forgotten by most, would eventually resurface, and with it, the unsettling possibility that Dr. Almeida had somehow foreseen a disaster that would shake Lisbon to its very core. In the heart of Lisbon, 1796, Dr. Francisco de Almeida was a figure who embodied the convergence of two worlds, the world of Enlightenment-era scientific rationalism and the world of deeply rooted superstitions that still gripped many in Portuguese society. A respected physician, Almeida was well versed in the latest medical advancements of his time, particularly those that emerged from Europe's growing fascination with dissection, anatomy, and the study of human physiology. His training had been rigorous, grounded in the methods of observation and analysis that were increasingly reshaping the medical field. But while he was undoubtedly a man of reason, his environment, a city still haunted by ancient beliefs, demanded that he also navigate the complex intersection between science and the supernatural. Lisbon was a city of contrasts in 1796. It had been, for centuries, a cultural and intellectual hub in Europe, one of the key centers of thought and commerce. Yet, even as it leaned toward the ideals of the Enlightenment, many of its citizens still clung to deeply ingrained superstitions, beliefs that often bordered on the mystical. The aftermath of the 1755 earthquake still lingered in the collective memory of the people, and the tremors of that disaster had not only shattered the city's buildings but also fractured the perception of safety and certainty. People who had once felt secure in their lives now looked around them with suspicion, wondering whether the ground beneath them might shift at any moment, or if unseen forces were at play, ready to take their lives with little warning. It was against this backdrop of uncertainty that Dr. Almeida worked. A physician at one of Lisbon's prestigious hospitals, his job was to investigate deaths, especially the mysterious ones. He was no stranger to death, nor was he unfamiliar with the strange and often unexplained circumstances surrounding many of the deaths that came to his attention. It was his task to determine the cause of death, and as with any good physician of his era, he had developed a keen eye for detail, an ability to read the human body with a precision that many of his contemporaries lacked. His reports, often dense with medical jargon, detailed the minutiae of bodily decay, the subtle clues left behind by nature's inevitable processes. But it wasn't just the mechanics of death that interested Almeida. He was equally fascinated by the idea that the body could, in some way, reveal hidden truths, not just about the person who had died, but about the world around them. In a time when medicine was still grappling with its limitations, the idea that the body might hold clues to forces beyond the realm of the human experience was an intriguing thought. In 1796, Dr. Almeida was called to examine a body that had been brought to the hospital under somewhat mysterious circumstances. The deceased was a man in his mid-40s, a well-known figure in the city's merchant class, who had died suddenly and without any obvious explanation. The cause of death was unclear, there had been no visible wounds or signs of violence, and the man had not been ill in the days leading up to his death. In short, it was a case that defied easy answers, a case that would require the keenest of medical minds to unravel. Dr. Almeida approached the task with his usual seriousness, determined to uncover the cause of death, though little could he know that the investigation would lead him down a path that would eventually leave an indelible mark on Lisbon's history. As he began his examination, Almeida noted the man's physical state with meticulous precision. He was a seasoned observer, accustomed to the subtleties of the human body. But this body, the body of the merchant, seemed to present anomalies that defied explanation. Almeida was particularly struck by the condition of the man's internal organs. There was a strange pallor to the liver, and the lungs seemed to be in an unusually frail state, almost as if they had been ravaged by some unknown disease. But it wasn't just the condition of the organs that puzzled him. It was the way the man's body seemed to react to the dissection. As Almeida cut through the layers of tissue, he noticed something that gave him pause. The man's heart, despite its normal appearance on the surface, seemed to have undergone a subtle yet unmistakable change. There was a fluidity to its structure, an unexplainable softness, as if it had been affected by some external force, a force that was not immediately clear. Almeida's thoughts began to race. He had seen many bodies in his career, but never one quite like this. The man's internal organs, despite showing no obvious signs of disease or injury, seemed to tell a story, one that he couldn't fully understand, but one that he couldn't ignore. His training had taught him that the body often spoke in riddles, revealing hidden truths if one knew how to listen. But what was this body trying to say? Why did it seem so different from the others? Why did it feel as though there were more at play here than just the natural decay of the human form? As Almeida continued with the autopsy, he began to jot down his observations, recording the strange anomalies he had noticed. He described the odd texture of the man's organs, the mysterious condition of his heart, and the unusual pallor that had settled over his liver. There was no logical explanation for these findings, at least not one that was consistent with the medical knowledge of the time. It was as though the body was defying the laws of nature, as if it were a map to some deeper mystery that was yet to be revealed. Almeida's report was, at first glance, just another routine autopsy document. He had examined the body, recorded his findings, and moved on. But there was something in his notes that made those who read them later question whether there was more to the story than met the eye. The doctor, of course, could not have known it at the time, but what he had written in that seemingly mundane report would eventually come to be viewed as something far more significant. The clues he had documented would, in hindsight, appear to foreshadow something catastrophic, something that would alter the fate of Lisbon itself. The anomalies he had noted, subtle as they were, seemed to speak to a deeper, more ominous force, one that lay just beneath the surface of the city. In the years that followed, Dr. Almeida's report would become the subject of intense scrutiny, as historians and medical experts revisited the findings with the benefit of hindsight. And what they discovered was both fascinating and unsettling. The strange condition of the man's organs, particularly the heart, seemed to echo the very symptoms of those who would later perish in the disaster that struck Lisbon, a disaster that would come to be known as the Great Lisbon Earthquake of 1755. Could it be that Dr. Almeida's report had, in some way, predicted the events that would unfold in Lisbon? Could it be that the anomalies he had documented were not just random medical curiosities, but signs of something much larger, something that connected the human body to the very forces of nature that governed the city's fate? The more the report was examined, the more it seemed to suggest that there was an eerie connection between the strange findings in the autopsy and the tragedy that was to come. The medical community, at the time, was not yet advanced enough to fully understand the significance of these findings. Dr. Almeida, for all his brilliance, had no way of knowing that the abnormalities he had documented were pointing to something far beyond the scope of his training. And yet, in the strange and mysterious world of Lisbon, where the boundaries between science and superstition were constantly shifting, the autopsy report would come to be seen as something more than just a record of a man's death. It became a symbol of a hidden truth that had yet to be uncovered, a truth that would ultimately shake the very foundations of the city. Dr. Francisco de Almeida had seen many bodies in his career, but the one he encountered in 1796 was unlike anything he had ever come across. At first glance, it appeared to be a routine autopsy, just another middle-aged man who had died of what seemed to be natural causes. But as he examined the body, Dr. Almeida's keen eye began to detect something that was out of the ordinary. His experience told him that there was more here than met the eye. The deceased, a well-known merchant from the city, had died suddenly. There were no obvious signs of illness, no traumatic injuries, and no apparent explanations for his unexpected demise. A sudden death, though not uncommon, is always a mystery for any physician, and so Dr. Almeida approached this case with the diligence he was known for. Almeida was no stranger to death. His training had made him meticulous and methodical in his approach to autopsies. But this case was different. His senses, sharpened over years of experience, told him that this body was hiding something. As he began his examination, Dr. Almeida immediately noted the abnormality in the deceased's organs. The liver, which typically had a healthy, reddish-brown appearance, was unusually pale, almost ghostly. The texture of the tissue seemed off, as though it had been affected by some kind of external force. The pallor of the liver was striking. It was the first anomaly that caught his attention. Moving on to the lungs, Dr. Almeida observed that the organs, while not necessarily diseased, appeared far more fragile than usual. There was a translucence to the tissues, an almost delicate structure that was atypical for a man of this age and background. This was not the typical wear and tear that one might expect in a man of his years. It was as though the lungs had been subtly altered by an unseen force, one that was not immediately recognizable to the physician. Then, as he turned his attention to the heart, something even stranger occurred. Dr. Almeida's eyes narrowed as he noticed the unusual softness of the heart's muscle. Normally, the heart was a firm, resilient organ, designed to withstand the relentless beating of life. But this heart was different. There was a kind of elasticity to it that alarmed Dr. Almeida. It was almost as though the heart was not quite what it seemed, as though its structure had been disturbed by an unseen, unknown influence. The physician couldn't explain it, but he felt an instinctual unease as he continued to dissect the organ, his scalpel tracing the delicate layers of tissue. Dr. Almeida meticulously recorded his findings, noting the oddities in the man's organs. His writing was clinical, filled with the precise language of a doctor accustomed to describing the minutiae of the human body. Yet, as he wrote, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was not quite right. His observations seemed to suggest that the man's organs had been affected by something that went beyond the ordinary scope of disease. The mysterious softness of the heart, the fragility of the lungs, and the eerie pallor of the liver, these were not the signs of a natural death. They hinted at something deeper, something that was not easily explained. But what could it be? Dr. Almeida's knowledge of medicine, while extensive for the time, was still limited in many ways. He had no concept of the modern science that would later explain the workings of the human body in more precise terms. His training, rooted in the classical teachings of Hippocrates and Galen, guided him through his medical practice, but the tools at his disposal were rudimentary by today's standards. There was no advanced imaging technology, no blood tests, and no understanding of the microbial world. Diseases like tuberculosis, which would later be understood in greater detail, were still shrouded in mystery. The physician had few ways of knowing what had caused the strange condition of the merchant's organs. As the autopsy continued, Dr. Almeida couldn't help but wonder, what was the cause of this bizarre presentation? Was it a new disease, something that had never been seen before? Or was it a sign of something more troubling? Could the man have been affected by some environmental factor, something hidden in the air, the water, or the very ground of Lisbon itself? For Dr. Almeida, the unanswered questions lingered in the air like an unsettling fog. His observations, though detailed and precise, were incomplete. There was no clear diagnosis, no tidy conclusion that he could offer the grieving family. And yet, something in the man's body seemed to point toward an imminent disaster. As the years would reveal, the strange anomalies in the merchant's body were far from a coincidence. They were a harbinger, a faint whisper from the future that Dr. Almeida could not have understood at the time. It was only much later, in the wake of the Great Lisbon earthquake of 1755, that the full significance of his autopsy report would be realized. What had seemed like an isolated case, a mere curiosity to be examined and dismissed, would later be revisited with a sense of dread. The strange findings in the merchant's body were eerily consistent with the symptoms seen in those who perished during the earthquake. The softness of the heart, the fragile lungs, and the pale liver were not just signs of illness, they were signs of impending doom. Dr. Almeida's report, though unremarkable in its time, would eventually come to be seen as a chilling medical prophecy. The connection between the autopsy findings and the earthquake that would devastate Lisbon was not immediately apparent, but it became clearer with the passing of time. The earthquake, which struck in 1755, was one of the deadliest in history, leveling much of the city and killing tens of thousands of people. The destruction was cataclysmic, the aftermath far-reaching. But for those who understood the strange observations made by Dr. Almeida years earlier, the earthquake seemed less like a natural disaster and more like an inevitable event, one foretold by the very body of a man who had died prematurely. Dr. Almeida, for all his skill and precision, could not have known what the future held. He was a man of science, not a prophet. And yet, the eerie connection between his autopsy report and the destruction that would later visit Lisbon cannot be denied. The clues were there, hidden in the folds of the body, waiting to be uncovered by those who would come after. Almeida's role in the larger narrative of Lisbon's fate would never have been fully understood in his lifetime. His work was a part of the medical community, a part of the everyday grind of hospital life. But what he had discovered was no ordinary case. It was a glimpse into something far greater, something that would forever be etched into the history of Lisbon and into the annals of medicine. Dr. Almeida's autopsy report, with its strange and unsettling findings, would become a key piece of the puzzle, one that would only be solved years later. For those who would come after, the discovery of the autopsy report was more than just a matter of medical interest. It was a chilling reminder of how the past and the future are intertwined in ways that we can never fully comprehend. It was a reminder that sometimes, the body itself can hold the key to understanding forces far greater than anything we can explain. And in this case, it was the silent testimony of a body, examined with precision and care, that foretold a citywide tragedy, one that would claim thousands of lives and leave Lisbon forever changed. As the investigation into Dr. Almeida's autopsy findings continued, the medical community and historians began to scrutinize his report with increasing intensity. What had seemed like a strange but inconsequential case years ago now seemed to contain the seeds of something far more significant. The mystery of the merchant's death, initially relegated to the dusty corners of medical history, began to take on new importance. Dr. Almeida's observations, so strange and inexplicable at the time, now seemed to point towards something much larger. Were they the product of a brilliant mind that had stumbled upon an unknown medical condition? Or was there something more to the story, something that transcended the realm of the medical and ventured into the mystical and prophetic? In the years following the earthquake, a growing number of individuals began to re-examine Dr. Almeida's autopsy report. Historians, doctors, and scientists all took an interest in the document, eager to uncover its secrets. Some dismissed it as a coincidence, a case of a brilliant physician simply making an unusual observation without understanding its true significance. But others saw it as a remarkable piece of history, a clue left behind by a man who, unknowingly, had predicted one of the most devastating natural disasters in history. In the end, the autopsy report that Dr. Almeida had written would become more than just a historical document. It would be remembered as a foretelling of doom, a warning that had been overlooked and ignored in its time. The strange anomalies in the merchant's body, once considered insignificant, would come to symbolize the mysterious and often inexplicable ways in which the world works, and how, sometimes, the past can leave behind clues that we are not yet capable of understanding. And so, Dr. Almeida's report stands as both a testament to the limits of human knowledge and a reminder of the mysteries that still lie hidden within the folds of time. As the years passed, Dr. Francisco de Almeida's autopsy report, with its unsettling observations and medical curiosities, faded into the background of Lisbon's busy medical world. His name remained well regarded in the medical community, and his work continued to shape the discourse around medicine in the city. Yet, the report itself, written with precise detail about the mysterious condition of the deceased merchant's body, remained largely overlooked. Few paid much attention to its cryptic findings, and even fewer made the connection between the bizarre symptoms described and the city's future fate. But like many hidden truths, this one was destined to resurface, unseen forces working behind the scenes to ensure that the past would one day make its presence known. It wasn't until a later generation of scholars and medical professionals took it upon themselves to sift through old records and documents that Dr. Almeida's autopsy findings were rediscovered. In this new era of inquiry, researchers began to scrutinize the details of the autopsy with a level of attention and insight that had not been afforded to it in the past. At first, the document appeared to be just another routine medical examination, nothing more than an account of an unexplained death, like many others in the annals of medical history. But as scholars dug deeper into the report, a chilling realization began to take shape. The symptoms described in the autopsy were not simply signs of a mysterious illness or disease. They mirrored, with uncanny precision, the symptoms experienced by those who would later perish in a disaster that shook Lisbon to its very core. The Great Lisbon Earthquake of 1755 remains one of the most devastating natural disasters in recorded history. On the morning of November 1st, the earth beneath the city's feet suddenly and violently trembled. Buildings collapsed in a matter of moments, and the destruction was catastrophic. The earthquake was followed by a series of tsunamis, further devastating the coastline and drowning countless victims. Fires broke out across the city, adding to the chaos and destruction. The loss of life was staggering, and the survivors were left in a state of disbelief. In the wake of the disaster, questions abounded. How had such a catastrophe occurred? Could anyone have foreseen it? And most hauntingly, was there any way to prevent it from happening again? While the earthquake was primarily a natural disaster, the psychological and cultural aftermath of the event was equally profound. Lisbon, a city that had once prided itself on its intellectual and philosophical advances, suddenly found itself confronting the reality of its fragility. The great earthquake shattered not only the physical landscape but also the sense of safety and certainty that the city had enjoyed. The loss of so many lives, so quickly, without warning, left the survivors grappling with feelings of helplessness and dread. In the aftermath, the question of fate became a central concern. Was the earthquake a divine punishment? Or was it simply a natural occurrence, one that had been impossible to predict? For many, the question of whether the disaster could have been foreseen or prevented lingered in the air, unanswered and unsettling. But it was here, in this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, that the rediscovery of Dr. Almeida's autopsy report would begin to take on a more ominous significance. As historians and scientists reviewed the details of the merchant's autopsy, it became clear that the symptoms described, particularly the condition of the heart, lungs, and liver, bore a striking resemblance to the symptoms observed in those who had died in the earthquake. The very anomalies that Dr. Almeida had documented in the merchant's body were eerily similar to the conditions seen in the victims of the disaster. The pale liver, the fragile lungs, the unusual softness of the heart, these were not merely random observations. They seemed to be pointing toward a deeper, more disturbing truth. It was as though the body of the merchant had been a living prophecy, a silent testament to a disaster that had yet to unfold. The similarities between the findings in the autopsy and the symptoms observed in the victims of the earthquake raised more questions than answers. Could it be that the body of the merchant, examined years before the earthquake, had somehow predicted the event? Could it be that there was something about the way the body responded to certain environmental factors, something that was not yet understood, that made it possible to foresee such a catastrophe? The eerie connection between Dr. Almeida's findings and the earthquake disaster led to further speculation about the possibility of medical prophecy. Could it be that certain individuals, particularly those trained in the careful observation of the human body, could sense or detect patterns that went beyond the realm of ordinary knowledge? The idea of medical prophecy, while tantalizing, was fraught with skepticism and controversy. Many in the scientific community dismissed the notion as pure fantasy, while others took a more cautious approach, acknowledging the possibility that some connections, however subtle, might exist between the human body and the larger forces of nature. The concept of prophetic knowledge, whether divine or scientific, remained a deeply divisive issue, one that blurred the line between reason and superstition. The rediscovery of Dr. Almeida's report and its chilling connections to the earthquake ignited intense debate in both medical and historical circles. Some scholars argued that the findings were simply coincidental, that there was no way to link the symptoms described in the autopsy to the earthquake itself. They pointed out that the medical knowledge of the time was not advanced enough to make accurate predictions about natural disasters. Others, however, were more open to the possibility that Dr. Almeida's observations had captured something that could not be explained by the science of his day. The idea that the body could hold clues to the future was both fascinating and unsettling, and it challenged the very foundation of what was thought to be possible in the realm of medical science. The debate surrounding Dr. Almeida's autopsy findings was further complicated by the cultural and intellectual climate of the time. Lisbon, in the late 18th century, was a city at the crossroads of two competing worldviews. On one hand, there was the Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, logic, and empirical evidence. On the other hand, there was the lingering influence of traditional religious and mystical beliefs, which held that the world was governed by unseen forces, gods, spirits, and other supernatural entities, that could not be fully understood or controlled by human beings. This tension between reason and faith created an environment in which ideas like medical prophecy could both flourish and be dismissed in equal measure. As the years went by, the debate over Dr. Almeida's report continued, with some scholars advocating for a more mystical interpretation of the findings, while others insisted on a strictly scientific explanation. The report became a symbol of the larger struggle between the old and the new, between superstition and science, between belief and skepticism. In the end, the legacy of Dr. Almeida's autopsy report would remain ambiguous, part medical curiosity, part historical enigma, and part prophecy. But beyond the intellectual debates and the unanswered questions, there was one undeniable truth. The autopsy report had, in some way, tapped into a deeper, darker mystery. The strange observations made by Dr. Almeida had, against all odds, seemed to predict the very catastrophe that would devastate Lisbon, a tragedy that had shaken the city to its core. Whether by coincidence, by intuition, or by some other force, Dr. Almeida's report had become a part of the larger narrative of Lisbon's fate. And in the end, the story of Dr. Almeida's autopsy, with its strange and unsettling findings, serves as a reminder of the mysteries that lie hidden beneath the surface of history. Some truths, it seems, are not meant to be understood in their time. Some mysteries are only revealed when the right eyes are looking, when the past and the future collide in ways that we cannot yet comprehend. Dr. Almeida's report, a simple medical document on the surface, holds within it the echoes of a tragedy that would haunt Lisbon for centuries to come. And in this haunting, it invites us to ask the same questions that the people of Lisbon asked after the earthquake. What signs have we missed? What prophecies lie hidden, waiting to be uncovered? And how much of the future can we truly see before it arrives? The rediscovery of Dr. Francisco de Almeida's autopsy report and the unsettling parallels it drew with the tragic events of the 1755 Lisbon earthquake did more than provoke academic curiosity. It opened a door to a wider examination of the role that medical science, intuition, and even superstition played in shaping the city's cultural and intellectual landscape. Dr. Almeida, in his careful, almost attached dissection of the merchant's body, had unknowingly documented signs that would later appear eerily prescient. But was this foresight a result of scientific acumen, a prophetic vision, or simply an extraordinary coincidence? In the aftermath of the earthquake, Lisbon streets were filled with a sense of shock and disbelief. The physical devastation was catastrophic, but the psychological toll it took on the survivors was no less profound. For those who had witnessed the collapse of the city, the fires that raged through the ruins, and the bodies of loved ones swallowed by the earth or crushed beneath debris, the world no longer seemed predictable. Lisbon, which had been a center of enlightenment and intellectual thought, was now a city haunted by an overpowering sense of vulnerability. How could a city, so rich in culture, knowledge, and progress, have been brought to its knees so swiftly? Could it have been avoided? Was there something, some warning, that could have been heeded before the earth trembled? Dr. Almeida's report, long forgotten in the wake of the earthquake, became a symbol of the larger question that plagued the city. Could disaster have been foretold? As scholars revisited the document, analyzing it with the benefit of hindsight, the question arose, was there a hidden wisdom in the body itself? Could the signs of impending catastrophe be etched into the physical form of an individual, as though the body were an instrument of prophecy? In a city so shaken by the very forces of nature, the idea that the body might bear the marks of something larger, something beyond the individual, struck a deep chord. The intellectual climate of Lisbon at the time was ripe for such an inquiry. The Age of Enlightenment, which had permeated Europe in the 18th century, had brought with it an unwavering belief in reason, science, and the ability of human intellect to conquer the mysteries of nature. Enlightenment thinkers had sought to replace superstition with rational thought, to dismantle the metaphysical explanations for the forces of the world and replace them with observable, testable, and repeatable evidence. But for all the triumphs of scientific progress, there was still a lingering sense that not all mysteries could be explained, that not all truths could be uncovered through reason alone. Dr. Almeida was a product of this intellectual environment, a man trained in the methods of observation and deduction that the Enlightenment had championed. He had been taught to view the body as a machine, a complex system of organs and fluids that, when properly understood, could reveal the underlying causes of disease and death. His autopsy report, as thorough as it was a testament to the scientific method, and yet, the more one examined it, the more it seemed to imply that there was something more, something inexplicable and intangible, that lay just beyond the reach of science. The condition of the merchant's body, as described in the report, was no mere medical anomaly. It was a reflection of something deeper, something that transcended the limits of medical knowledge at the time. The pale liver, the fragile lungs, and the softened heart were not typical signs of disease. They were outliers, anomalies that defied easy categorization. Yet they were also, in a sense, a warning, a message from the body itself that there was something fundamentally wrong. Whether this was an intuitive glimpse of an unknown medical condition or a manifestation of something larger, it was clear that Dr. Almeida's findings had struck at the very heart of the unknown. But the mystery did not end with the autopsy report itself. The rediscovery of the report after the earthquake raised even more questions, as those who examined it began to see in Dr. Almeida's words a kind of prophetic vision. The connection between the symptoms described in the autopsy and those exhibited by victims of the earthquake seemed impossible to ignore. The same signs of fragility and vulnerability, particularly in the heart, appeared in the bodies of those who had perished when the earth shook. It was as though the merchant's body had, years before the disaster, foreshadowed the catastrophe that would claim the lives of thousands in Lisbon. Was this simply an extraordinary coincidence, or was there something more at play? Could the merchant's body have been a living vessel of some sort of premonition, a signal from the natural world that went unnoticed by those who could not yet see beyond the physical? Could the signs be an intuitive response to the changing forces beneath Lisbon's earth, an early recognition of the shifting tectonic plates that would soon bring devastation to the city? This question would remain at the forefront of the debate surrounding Dr. Almeida's report, and it reflected the deeper intellectual tensions that were playing out in Lisbon at the time. For many of the city's intellectuals, the discovery of these eerie parallels between the autopsy and the earthquake seemed to be a sign that there were still mysteries in the world that could not be explained by science alone. They began to question whether the body, in its vulnerability and fragility, could in fact offer clues to larger, cosmic forces. Some even speculated that the merchant's death and the strange findings in his body might have been a manifestation of Lisbon's own fragile position on the earth, an early indication that something far larger than human understanding was at work beneath the surface. The intellectual climate in Lisbon during this time was one of both optimism and dread. The Enlightenment had ushered in an era of scientific exploration, and many believed that the mysteries of the universe were within reach. Yet, for all the progress that had been made, there were still limits to human knowledge. The earthquake, and the strange medical findings uncovered by Dr. Almeida, served as a stark reminder that the world was still a place of vast unknowns, where reason and science could not always provide the answers. It was as though the world was teasing humanity with glimpses of truth, only to retreat further into the shadows whenever human intellect attempted to reach too far. The rediscovery of Dr. Almeida's autopsy report thus became a kind of philosophical conundrum, a puzzle that forced the people of Lisbon to confront their understanding of the natural world. Was there a hidden wisdom within the human body itself, waiting to be deciphered? Or were these eerie parallels between the autopsy findings and the earthquake simply the product of coincidence, nothing more than an accident of nature that could not be explained? At the heart of this debate was the broader question of whether nature itself had a kind of order, an order that might be accessible to the human mind, but only through the most careful observation and introspection. For Dr. Almeida, the autopsy had been nothing more than a routine examination, a task that he had approached with the professionalism and scientific rigor that defined his career. Yet in the years following the earthquake, as his findings began to be re-examined, it became clear that there was something deeply mysterious about his observations. The Great Lisbon earthquake of 1755 had shaken the city to its very core. It had altered the physical landscape, devastated entire neighborhoods, and claimed thousands of lives. But it had also left behind a profound intellectual legacy, one that questioned the very nature of human understanding. The rediscovery of Dr. Almeida's report, and the eerie connection between his findings and the earthquake, suggested that there were still forces at work in the world that humanity had not yet fully grasped. The body, as a symbol of life and death, had become a vessel for a greater truth, one that could not be fully explained by the knowledge of the time. In the end, the legacy of Dr. Almeida's autopsy report transcended its medical implications. It became a symbol of the unknowable, a reminder that, no matter how far science and reason advanced, there were still mysteries in the world that lay beyond human understanding. The strange anomalies in the merchant's body, once dismissed as medical curiosities, had come to symbolize the deeper mysteries of the natural world, mysteries that, like the forces beneath the Earth's surface, remain hidden until the moment they erupted in the form of the earthquake. In this way, Dr. Almeida's report not only foretold the disaster that would strike Lisbon, but also challenged humanity to acknowledge the limitations of its knowledge and to confront the larger, more mysterious forces that shape the world around us. As Lisbon struggled to recover from the devastation of the 1755 earthquake, a new wave of intellectual curiosity began to emerge, one that sought to reconcile the city's deep philosophical traditions with the profound shock of the disaster. The seismic shift in Lisbon's intellectual and cultural landscape following the earthquake was as impactful as the physical destruction itself. The question of why the city had been struck so violently, and why it had suffered so incomprehensibly, became a matter of existential reflection. Was it an act of divine retribution, as many believed? Or was it a natural disaster, one that had merely occurred as part of the indifferent workings of nature? These questions pervaded every facet of life in Lisbon in the aftermath of the catastrophe, and the rediscovery of Dr. Almeida's autopsy report only deepened the sense of mystery and foreboding that the earthquake had created. Dr. Almeida's report, when revisited, took on a new significance. The strange anomalies he had documented in the merchant's body, the softness of the heart, the fragility of the lungs, and the pale appearance of the liver, were no longer just medical curiosities. They now seemed like ominous forewarnings. The connection between these findings and the earthquake's victims became too apparent to ignore. Those who had perished in the earthquake exhibited similar symptoms, though these were not immediately recognized until the full scale of the disaster had become apparent. The idea that an autopsy report could have inadvertently predicted a catastrophic event in Lisbon would have seemed preposterous to most at the time. Yet, as people began to examine it through the lens of the tragedy that had just unfolded, the eerie parallels could no longer be denied. The autopsy report, originally thought to be a mundane document, had now assumed an almost prophetic quality. It seemed as though the body of the deceased merchant had been a vessel for some kind of hidden knowledge, an early sign of the disaster that would soon claim countless lives. But the report raised a host of unsettling questions. Could the human body somehow detect or sense impending disaster? Was there an inherent connection between the physical state of the body and the larger, unpredictable forces of nature? These were not questions that could be answered easily, but they were questions that intrigued and unsettled many. The rediscovery of Dr. Almeida's findings gave rise to a new line of inquiry, one that blurred the boundaries between science and superstition, between reason and prophecy. As Lisbon continued to rebuild, the idea of prophecy began to take root in the public imagination. While many of the city's intellectuals remained firmly rooted in the rationalistic framework of the Enlightenment, others began to entertain the possibility that there was more to the universe than could be explained by reason alone. The earthquake had shaken not only the foundations of the city but also the confidence of its people in the predictable, orderly world they thought they had understood. The rediscovery of Dr. Almeida's autopsy report, which seemed to predict the disaster, prompted some to wonder if the human body, as a product of nature, could somehow serve as a conduit for knowledge that transcended ordinary scientific understanding. The report was examined from every conceivable angle, and scholars began to debate its significance. Some argued that the anomalies described in the autopsy were merely coincidental, that the merchant's condition was the result of some obscure, undiagnosed illness that had no bearing on the earthquake. Others, however, saw in it a profound mystery, a glimpse into a hidden order of nature. These scholars were not content with simply dismissing the report as an anomaly of medical science. They saw it as a piece of a much larger puzzle, one that connected the physical body to the unseen forces of the natural world. Was the strange condition of the merchant's body a kind of metaphor for the fragility of life in Lisbon itself? Was it possible that the human body, as a reflection of the natural world, could somehow anticipate the seismic shifts that were to come? This new line of thought gained traction in certain circles. While the scientific community remained skeptical, a growing number of intellectuals began to entertain the idea that the body might be more than just a biological machine. It could be an instrument of nature, capable of perceiving forces beyond the normal scope of human perception. Dr. Almeida's autopsy report became a focal point for these discussions, as it seemed to offer an example of how the body could reveal truths that were hidden from the conscious mind. The report itself, though written in the clinical language of 18th century medical practice, became a symbol of the larger mystery that had unfolded in Lisbon. The idea that the body, the earth, and the forces of nature were all interconnected in ways that were not fully understood. The concept of the body as a vessel for hidden knowledge was not new. Throughout history, many cultures had believed that the human body could serve as a conduit for spiritual or divine knowledge. In ancient Greece, for example, the physician Hippocrates had argued that the body contained within it a kind of natural wisdom, which could be accessed through careful observation and treatment. In the centuries that followed, this idea evolved, and various schools of thought, from humoral theory to the study of vital forces, explored the ways in which the body was believed to reflect the natural world. Dr. Almeida's report, in this context, could be seen as a modern manifestation of this ancient belief. It was as though the human body had, in some inexplicable way, anticipated the forces that would soon bring destruction to Lisbon. But what, exactly, was the source of this knowledge? Was it something divine, something supernatural, or something rooted in the very fabric of nature itself? The idea of prophecy, whether medical or otherwise, had deep roots in human history. In ancient times, prophets were believed to be individuals who could peer into the future, divining truths that were hidden from the general population. These prophets often delivered their messages in the form of cryptic visions or symbolic dreams, which were interpreted by those around them. In a city like Lisbon, where both religious belief and intellectual curiosity coexisted, it was easy to see how the concept of prophecy could take hold. The idea that the body might hold the key to understanding the future was not necessarily a new one. However, in the context of the 18th century, it was an idea that clashed with the prevailing scientific worldview. The Enlightenment had sought to replace mystical explanations of the world with rational, evidence-based reasoning. Yet, as the rediscovery of Dr. Almeida's autopsy report demonstrated, the boundaries between science and the supernatural were not always so clearly defined. The more scholars and intellectuals examined the report, the more they began to see it as a symbol of something much larger, the fragility of the human condition and the unpredictability of the forces that shape the world. Dr. Almeida's detailed observations of the merchant's body were no longer seen as isolated medical facts, but as part of a larger narrative about the interconnectedness of life, death, and the earth. The softening of the heart, the fragility of the lungs, and the pale liver were not just signs of illness. They were signs of vulnerability, of the body's precarious existence in an unpredictable world. In this sense, Dr. Almeida's autopsy report became a metaphor for the city itself, strong, vibrant, and full of promise, yet fragile and vulnerable to forces beyond its control. The connection between the body and the earth was further emphasized by the historical context in which the report was rediscovered. The earthquake, which had struck Lisbon so suddenly and violently, had shattered the city's illusions of safety and certainty. It had reminded the people of Lisbon that their lives were always subject to the whims of nature, that no amount of intellectual progress or cultural achievement could protect them from the forces that lay just beneath the surface. The rediscovery of Dr. Almeida's report, with its eerie predictions and unsettling observations, was a stark reminder of the fragile relationship between humanity and the natural world. The body, like the city, could only withstand so much before it succumbed to forces beyond its control. In the aftermath of the earthquake, the questions raised by Dr. Almeida's report began to take on new urgency. Could the body serve as a warning, a harbinger of things to come? Could the signs that had been overlooked in the merchant's body have been a signal to the people of Lisbon, a warning that they had failed to heed? These questions, unanswered in the years following the earthquake, continued to reverberate in the minds of those who studied the report. The idea of prophecy, whether rooted in medical science or in some deeper connection to the natural world, became a subject of growing fascination and debate. As the city of Lisbon slowly rebuilt itself, the rediscovery of Dr. Almeida's autopsy report became a symbol of the uncertainty that lingered in the wake of the earthquake. The report, with its strange and inexplicable observations, was a reminder that there were still mysteries in the world that defied explanation. And in that mystery, there was a certain power, one that was both unsettling and fascinating, a reminder that the world was not as ordered and predictable as many had once believed. The body, like the earth, was subject to forces beyond comprehension, and the connection between the two was a mystery that had yet to be fully understood.